Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another program of the INSS podcast series. My name is Adi Kantor. I'm a research associate in the INSS, and on the occasion of the 27th of January, we dedicate our special program to the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. 77 years ago, on the 27th of January 1945, stood Soviet soldiers in front of the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest death and concentration camp built by Nazi Germany. Still and shocked they stood, young lieutenants, weakened and tired of war, to the sights of horror and cruelty, as walking skeletons observed them from behind barbed wires, finally free. These unprecedented sights were soon going to change not only them, but human history forever. Ivan Martinushkin, then a 21-year-old lieutenant, shared his recollections from that day, and I quote, "It was hard to watch them. I remember their faces, especially their eyes, which betrayed their ordeal. We saw emaciated, tortured, impoverished people. Those were the people I first encountered. We could tell from their eyes that they were happy to be saved from this hell, happy that now they weren't threatened by death in a crematorium, happy to be freed. And we had the feeling of doing a good deed, liberating these people from this hell." Unquote. Approximately 1.1 million men, women, and children were murdered at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and over 90% of them were Jewish. 77 years later, after the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, Jewish hatred seems to be far from over. In the past years, there has been a very concerning rise of anti-Semitic events, both in Europe and in the US, when only last week, 4 American Jews were taken hostage during a Shabbat prayer by a terrorist in a synagogue in Colleyville, Texas. What can be said about the phenomenon of anti-Semitism in the American society of our time? Why has it increased so rapidly in the past years? How do American Jews cope with this ever-growing phenomenon? In order to discuss these questions in depth, I have the privilege and honor to host Professor Alvin Rosenfeld in today's program. Professor Alvin Rosenfeld is Professor of English and Jewish Studies at Indiana University. He holds the Irving Glazer Chair in Jewish Studies and is director of the university's Institute of the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism. In recent years, he has written and edited works on contemporary antisemitism, and some of his publications on this subject have evoked intense debate. His edited works include Contending with Anti-Semitism in a Rapidly Changing Political Climate in 2021, Anti-Zionism, Anti-Semitism, the Dynamics of Delegitimization in 2019, Deciphering the New Anti-Semitism in 2015, and Resurgent Anti-Semitism, Global Perspectives in 2013. In December 2021, Professor Rosenfeld published an article titled, "How Are American Jews Faring in an Era of Rising Antisemitism?" which was a special publication in the framework of the INSS collection of articles on contemporary antisemitism in the United States. In his article, he shares his insights on contemporary antisemitism in the United States and its alarming rise, based on his years-long research and expertise in the field. Good morning to you, Professor Alvin Rosenfeld. It is an honor to have you on our show. We're very happy that you're joining us today. Hello.
Hello, Adi. My only regret is that we're not seeing one another face to face, but thanks to the miracle of Zoom, we can have this conversation. So I'm honored to be part of it, in fact. Let's begin by reconnecting to what you just said about this incident in Texas. It's only a few days old, and we're still figuring out some of what took place, but a lot is clear by now. And one of the things that's clear, unfortunately, is that it confirms something I said in my INSS article that I wish I hadn't had to write, namely Jews in America can no longer take their safety for granted. That's an astonishing fact. There are lots of Jews in America outside of Israel. In fact, more Jews live in this country than anywhere else, somewhere probably between 5 and 6 million people. Day by day, most Jews go about their lives in ordinary fashion and don't think twice about who might be coming up behind their back or who might be invading their synagogues or what have you. But the situation has changed, and not for the better. I doubt that there is a synagogue, a Jewish school, a Jewish community center, or other Jewish agencies in America without security these days. Like you, Adi, I know you go back and forth to Germany under normal times for your research. I do the same, although not over the last couple of years. And as an American Jew, I was always upset by the fact that to go to the Beit Knesset, I had to pass through security guards. And yet I came to realize the necessity for that. And then I thanked my lucky stars that, in fact, I was living in America and not Europe. It was not the situation in this country. Well, it now is. As I said, virtually every Jewish site in America is now guarded the way it is in America because of an accelerating threat against Jewish life. The Texas incident is only the latest, as we know, in a number of such incidents that have taken place in recent years, most notoriously in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Synagogue, in Poway, California, near San Diego, at a kosher supermarket in Jersey City, at a rabbi's home during a Hanukkah party in Monsey, New York, and on and on. Some of these assaults have been lethal and have resulted in the deaths of numbers of Jews. Will there be more upcoming? I would hate to think there will be, and yet we have to be realistic and guard against it. So the situation is a very mixed one. Day by day, Jews go about their business like all other Americans. Most Jews don't think of themselves as anything but American citizens of either Jewish ethnic heritage or Jewish religious connection. We don't feel that we're living as guests in a host country, as Jews had in the past. And yet, even as I hear myself say that, I realize our situation is no longer normal and that Jews can no longer take their safety for granted. And it takes place on a couple of different planes. It takes place violently on the street level, particularly among Hasidic and other observant Jews in New York. Assaults take place every week, if not every day. They tend to be either underreported or unreported, but in fact, such things do happen, and in other cities as well. Beyond the anti-Jewish hostility of that violent kind, though, in the realm of culture, politics, society at large, there are new tensions in America.
Exactly. You refer to this in the article as well.
Right. There's a very intense culture war going on among people on the extremes in American society. It's very difficult, unfortunately, to locate the center of American society because American society right now is badly polarized, badly riven. The politics tends to be dysfunctional. The economy at the moment shows very high inflation. On the other hand, the stock market keeps going up. So it's a weird time. A lot of people are out of work, but there are a lot of jobs that go begging for workers. Generally, as we know, whenever the economy goes down, anti-Semitism goes up. Whenever the social fabric begins to be rent and people get angry at one another and pop off at one another, and not just at Jews, people who are conspicuous as being other. That can include Blacks, that can include Asians, that can certainly include Jews. Um, find it they're in a new place, in a very uncomfortable place. So that briefly is kind of the feel of what it's like to be in America today.
Thank you, Professor Rosenfeld. Let me ask you, why do you think this is all happening now in recent years? According to your opinion, what has changed in America in the past years that has created the situation where you yourself say that American Jews do not feel safe anymore to go into a synagogue, which is such a basic thing, or to wear to have Jewish signs on them when they walk? Things have changed in America. What happened?
Right. It's not just instantaneous. It does take back a while. 9/11, of course, changed American life a lot with the attacks on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon. Terror hit America. And America responded with the so-called war against terror. And that's taken different turns over the years. But Americans have not been used to being targeted. We fight our wars abroad. But instead, the war came home on 9/11. The jihadist threat was a distant threat. Afghanistan and other places, well, it's no longer so distant. The guy, in fact, who held people hostage the other day at the synagogue in Texas is almost certainly a jihadi. And there have been other incidents of that kind as well. So we always have to try to find who's behind these incidents and what motivates them. And there are a variety of people behind them. Certainly the far right, particularly in its white nationalist and increasingly militant form, is involved. It came to a head in Charlottesville, Virginia, a few years ago at the terrible Unite the Right movement, where anti-Semitic slogans and symbols were on display. As we know, January the 6th, a year ago, saw major riots at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. That was not an anti-Semitic incident as such, but there were anti-Semites among those people, some of them wearing clothing.
Shirts, unforgettable shirts, yes.
That kind of thing as well. On the political and ideological level, the left, in particular the far left, is very energetically pursuing its own goals according to a kind of identity politics which favors certain groups and disfavors other groups. And Jews are certainly in disfavor among those groups as well. It's ludicrous to me, for the first time in my life, to be branded as white and privileged. I never thought of myself in those terms. I still don't, but others do. And not just me, but lots of other Jews. And it's showing up in particular on college campuses right now. Not every college campus, but there are probably one or two universities in America where anti-Jewish sentiment is very intense and very chronic. My own university tends to be a more conservative institution, but even here we're seeing the same thing. Swastikas have appeared on campus recently, as they have in town. A number of Jewish students living in dormitories recently had the mezuzot on their doorposts taken off, and whoever did that put on 3 pennies. So they remove the mezuzah and put coins, Jews in money. Of course, a very familiar trope.
Of course, this is pure anti-Semitism. Yeah.
Pure anti-Semitism. Mine is a university of maybe 46,000 students. we might be talking about 10 or 20 students, but enough to set a tone that is really very bad. So just two of my recent students wrote to me as follows. One last May during the war with Hamas, as follows: since the beginning of the current conflict in Israel, the student writes to me, I've witnessed an overwhelming amount of anti-Semitism on campus and on social media. And another student writes, these are exceptionally scary times. I feel that my peers on campus and people in the country have turned against me. And that's new for
This
American.
is new, exactly.
Yeah.
This is new.
But one finds it now in many, many places, including many of the country's most elite campuses. So what's going on? Much of it involves anti-Israel hostility, going under the term of anti-Zionism, but the fact of the matter is anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism are being advanced and excused under the guise of what's called social justice. So people who want peace and justice, who among us doesn't, after all, now use these tag phrases under the goal of advancing social justice to attack Jewish students, to attack the state of Israel.
This is amazing. It's like really, it's using the tools of democracy in order to promote anti-democratic values or so-called values. Yeah,
precisely.
Using democracy, but to
yes.
And this is happening as well in Europe, by the way. This is
it is happening in Europe, and what we see, Adi, both in Europe and here, is a regression of democracy. In fact, and Jews thrive best in liberal societies. That's to say, societies that are open, tolerant, pluralistic, that encourage and reward initiative and the like. And the American Jewish story has been by and large a successful one because Jews have fit into that kind of America. What we're now seeing is the advent of illiberalism in place of liberalism, and it's very harmful.
Where do you see do you see more and more similarities between American Jews and European Jews when it comes to the coping with the phenomenon of anti-Semitism? This used to really be something that is more, we saw it more, we witnessed it more in Europe, and we see it more and more in the US. Do you see, you also address it in your article, the parallels between Europe and the US today?
Right. I think European Jews were on guard much earlier. They recognized simply by right of living in Europe that they're living in countries with long histories of anti-Semitism.
They're used to going to, European and German Jewish children, you're used to going to schools, seeing every day the policemen and the entrance and the cameras, the security cameras. This has been there all along. This is so very not normal, but this is the normal in Germany.
It's an abnormal normal, but Jews have adapted to it because they've had to adapt to it. A few minutes ago, I mentioned the mezuzot on the dormitories, rooms of Jewish students. In Europe, nobody would put up a mezuzah like that. They would know that if you put up a mezuzah, you're calling attention to yourself. Whereas Jews, until recently, have not had to hide. They've not had to whisper. They could be proudly and openly Jewish. That's now changing. And they've got a lot of catch-up work to do in order to learn how to adapt. I'd say we're still in kindergarten somewhere with regard to this. We have to feel our way forward. We're not without friends, and there are people in certain Christian communities, even in certain Muslim communities, who are ready to stand with us, I would say. We need that kind of allyship, and we should return it and do return it as well. But it's a new phenomenon for
Yeah.
American Jews to deal with this, and we're still feeling our way forward.
I think the shock is very big. Of course, no one expected this. I would like to relate to your latest point where you talk about allies and how important it is to have allies, non-Jewish allies from other minority groups that feel also, or witness the racism and around
Right.
them. I do want to ask you about what happened in latest May. In May 2021, Operation Guardian of the Walls. You mentioned in your article that suddenly what was new, and this was really I don't remember. It was really unprecedented that American Jews felt that the allies they once had are no longer there. That no one stood up for them, no one protected them. They what they thought, what they got used to all along, all those years, people were suddenly not there by their side. What happened? What happened in May 2021 that changed the whole
Right.
course?
You're right to call attention to that. Look, there are even members of the United States Congress.
In the Congress, exactly. But
And
I know it also in the personal level, friends or people who they used to call them friends or allies. They were not there in the time of need, in the hour of truth, and this is very new and very shocking. This is, I think, what shocked American Jews the most in May, not having the allies that they used to have.
Right. It has to do, I'm sorry to say, with attitudes towards Israel. Most Americans probably are still favorable to Israel. But if you break it down both generationally and politically, younger people much less favorable to Israel, largely because of what they get on campuses, by the way.
Yeah, it's a matter of age.
Right. So we're losing, I would say, I won't say we're losing a whole generation, but within the younger generation, we're certainly losing sizable portions of people. And then it breaks down politically as well. Surveys have been conducted by responsible polling firms about attitudes towards Israel among Democrats, Republicans, and independents. Republicans far and away are more favorable, independents next, Democrats less and less. And on the so-called progressive wing of the Democratic Party, it's downright hostile.
Yes.
So given all of that, Israel was absorbing rockets from Gaza day after day, hitting back with the Iron Dome and other things. One would have expected most Americans, in fact, to see what was going on and show sympathy for Israel. In the communal level, that happened, but in the media, especially in the more liberal media, not so. Progressivism, for all of the good things one can say about its ideals, is not so good when it comes to what's happening on the ground with regard to Israel and to Jews. So certainly we need to rebuild friendships, alliances with lots of people, Asians, by the way, and America has a diverse array of Asians in our population, are also being attacked. I'm almost ashamed to say, but just 2 days ago, an Asian woman in New York City waiting for a subway was pushed to her death by some guy who came up behind her, threw her onto the tracks as the train was coming, and it killed her right in there. And there have been other attacks against Asians as well. And one of the things being held against Asians as well as against Jews is that both groups are successful. They're educationally successful, they're occupationally and economically successful. And this success, for which, in fact, one should clap one's hands, instead is being considered an unearned and unwarranted privilege. much.
Exactly.
It's perverse, but
Mm-hmm.
it certainly feeds this hostility against Jews, Asians, and some others.
Yeah. And this has hostility.
I'll
Yes, please.
add just one more thing, if I may. Be'ezrat Hashem, there won't be another rocket attack from Gaza, but we both know there probably will be. And I can tell you there are already groups in America preparing protests against Israel
For the next round.
So this is not necessarily spontaneous. It's
No.
organized. People out with banners don't make those banners overnight.
Was it also organized in May? What we saw, what we witnessed?
Some of it was, I'm sure,
Mm-hmm.
and some of it was just outright brutal rowdyism, thuggery as well. So it's a combination of groups, very hostile groups, preparing now, believe me, for what will come in the next round, to people infected by a generally angry, hostile, aggressive mood, and they feel it licensed to just let go and hit out. Not good. This, by the way, at a time when there are groups in America calling to defund the police.
Mm-hmm. This has been going on in the US for the past years as well. Yes. You mentioned the hostility, and hostility we see, of course, from the right, from the left. What we witness, I think, in the past years is something very interesting, where we see the two ends, the two radical ends, both the far right, the far left. When it comes to anti-Semitism, this is where they meet. And I really want to know how you view this. What are the similarities between these two very different ideological paths, two very different, and I mean, they're actually enemies to one another, but when it comes to Jews, they come together. So what are the similarities between the two, and where do they part? What do you think?
Right, you're right to ask that question, because normally these groups would have nothing to do with one another, and if anything, they would be antagonistic towards one another. So what drives them? What drives them is a sense of grievance. Each group is aggrieved by the sense of being oppressed. And if you're oppressed, you need to locate the oppressor. Now, this is and guess who is to blame, of course? The group that's been traditionally scapegoated as the cause of a society's problems over a long, long period of time. Now, this dualistic thinking, bifurcating reality into the oppressed and the oppressors, is so simplistic as to be foolish. And it won't stand up to intellectual scrutiny whatsoever, or to moral or ethical values. But what drives people is passion these days. And even before we get to ideas and ideologies, we're at the level of very intense antagonistic feeling on the part of the left and the part of the right. It should be against one another. It often is against one another, but not.
This used to be the case for in history,
Yes, and remains the case to some degree in terms of these very big and very intense culture wars. But in looking for the oppressor, you look for the most successful groups. There's been a movement in America against the so-called 1%. What is the 1%? 1% are high earners, people who earn a lot of money through the hard work they do. And there are lots of Jews in that 1%. So there's a kind of economic basis to this anti-Semitic hostility, as well as a social, political, and ideological basis. And when you put all that together, we're not in a good place.
Has this entered mainstream society, Professor Rosenfeld? What we witness so clearly in Europe, that the radical ends are already so much inside the mainstream society that we cannot even call them anymore margins. It's right there. I mean, for example, in Germany, you see the AfD used to be the third biggest party in the Bundestag. I mean, this is mainstream society. So Is this what we're witnessing also in the US?
I wish I could tell you no, but I have to tell you yes. And it's fed to a large degree by social media, no question about it. The largest disseminator of hate speech of all kinds, including anti-Semitic hate speech, or the social media, but not just the social media. Mainstream media is itself very bifurcated, very oppositional, some of it not friendly to us at all. Campuses, and America has a great many colleges and universities. Most are not beset by ongoing chronic anti-Jewish, anti-Israel hostility. But as I said before, there might be 100 or 200 that are, and they include many of the country's most elite universities. These are the universities that produce the next generation of leadership. And the indoctrination that goes on at some of these universities is not at all good. It's being opposed time and again, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But we now have people, I mean, talk about the mainstream. There are people in Congress who are talking about Jewish money influencing American policy and the like.
Without thinking, without apologizing even. It really has become mainstream discourse. It's okay to say this today.
There are no penalties for that.
Yes, the shame. People lost their shame, maybe.
Adi, both you and I have spent a lot of time thinking about, studying about, writing about the Shoah. And we're now, in fact, close to, this program will be on Holocaust Remembrance Day. We've lived with the understanding for many years that knowledge of the Holocaust, while it won't be 100% preventative, would prevent people, so we thought, from ever again being openly expressing Jew hatred in public. We were simply wrong, by which I don't infer that we should stop, in fact, remembering, teaching, educating people about the Shoah. We have to do that, but it's not prophylactic. It's not preventative to the degree we wish it were. So we've got a lot of hard work to do, no question about it. I don't think, the last thing we want to do is despair and throw up our hands and say we don't have a chance. We have to have a chance. The stakes are very, very high, and we can't afford to distance ourselves from this battle, and we certainly can't afford to lose it. So we'll just continue.
And to look at reality the way it really is definitely, I fully agree with you. Professor Rosenfeld, we are approaching the end, unfortunately. This, as I told you before, this subject deserves so much more time, of course. But I would like to ask you, of course, with regards to the reactions of American Jews towards this very, very concerning phenomenon. I would like to quote you. You state in the article the following. You say, "The culture wars raging in America are making many Jews feel set upon and vulnerable as never before. In addition to protecting themselves against physical harm, they need to figure out their place in a rapidly changing, highly charged, and suddenly threatening social and political landscape. How to navigate their way in a heretofore unknown and I hope I'm pronouncing it right, menacing terrain is a major challenge." So in the upcoming years, Professor Rosenfeld, and when considering the current situation with regards to anti-Semitism in the US and the challenges that American Jews are faced with, where is America headed? And where is Jewish, non-Jewish relations in America headed? Where do you see, where is it going to, where are we headed?
Where are we headed? We're close to finishing up our interview, and you and I both know, Adi, that we're supposed to end on a positive note. Correct? That's what
on a note that sees reality the way it is. Let's say it like this.
That sees reality in the way it is, but not give in to despair. Reality has been changing, and not for the better. There's no question about it. And yet, America is a country with very solid constitutional foundations. It is a proven democracy. It's being tested as never before. Well, it's being very seriously tested.
Mm-hmm.
I was about to say as never before. It has been tested before, and it's come through. So we need the kind of leadership at all levels, the political level, the cultural level, the religious level, the educational level, that recognizes the threat, not just to Jews, but to America as such at its very best, and are willing to do something necessary to return America to its best roots. We need, what America needs most of all right now is to calm down. Things are very, very overwrought. And when they're that way, people stop thinking, they just feel. And many of these feelings are hostile today. So we need to really step back a few paces and acknowledge what's good about this country, and certainly about ways in which Jews have fared well, and seek allies and join with them to do this work. So the reality at the moment is a troubled one, but there's nothing that says that it must remain troubled or get worse still. It could, God forbid. In which case I don't even want to think about what would lie ahead.
Yes.
But we need to. The last thing we can afford to do is be in denial. And the article that I was glad to write for you, and this particular conversation that I'm glad to, is to keep people from being in denial.
Yes.
We have to have people look at reality with both eyes wide open and see what's before them, and then act. And, biyachad, that's what we'll do.
Professor Rosenfeld, I couldn't have chosen a better ending to this very special program, especially on the occasion of the 27th of January, the Holocaust Remembrance Day. This is a very, very clear and important message. And I want to thank you on behalf of the INSS, my colleagues and myself. I want to thank you, first of all, for writing the article that I recommend all our viewers and listeners, of course, to read this important article, and for this conversation that I wished we had more time to develop it even more, but we will end it at that, and we will, of course, continue it in the next podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. And
my pleasure. My pleasure to be with you, Adi, בשנה הבאה בתל אביב.
בשנה הבאה בתל אביב ובירושלים. תודה רבה, Professor Rosenfeld, and thank you very much to our audience. Goodbye.
Bye.